Welcome to Decision 2020, the U.S. House of Representatives Candidate Forum. This is an opportunity for voters to hear directly from the candidates. Today, we turn our attention to the U.S. House of Representatives race in Michigan's 2nd Congressional District, where Republican incumbent U.S. Representative Bill Huizenga faces Democratic challenger Revered Bryan Berghoef, Libertarian Max Rixey, and Green Party candidate Jean-Michel Crevier. Taxpayer Party candidate Gerald Van Sickle has politely declined our invitation. We continue Decision 2020, the U.S. House of Representatives Candidate Forum for Michigan's 2nd Congressional District. Today's forum was recorded Tuesday, October 13th from the studios of the Meijer Public Broadcast Center at Grand Valley State University. Joining us now is Democratic challenger Revered Bryan Berghoef from Holland. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
All right. We'll just start out by telling our viewers a little bit about yourself and why serving in Congress is important to you.
Sure. I grew up right here in West Michigan, born and raised, was raised in the Christian Reformed Church. And so faith was very important to my life at an early age. And after college in Ann Arbor, I felt a call to ministry and enrolled in Calvin Theological Seminary in Grand Rapids, and I've been a pastor now for 15 years. And one of the things that being a pastor entails is being a good listener. And I've had the privilege to be with people in some of the high points of their lives, moments of joy like a wedding day or the birth of a child. But I'm also there on the hard times when a difficult diagnosis comes or it's time to lay a loved one to rest. And we're currently going through some really difficult times. And I think people are ready for a representative who shows up, who listens, and who's grounded in empathy and compassion. And I'd like to bring that to this role in Congress.
The coronavirus pandemic is a public health crisis, killing more than 210,000 Americans. It's impacting the economy, education, and society at large. In Congress, what steps would you promote stemming the spread of the disease and supporting the economy and our schools?
Well, we need to have a national test and trace program. We need to ensure that rapid testing is available, especially in schools and in places of employment, so people can know more quickly whether or not they have the virus, and then we can trace who they've contacted and properly quarantine as well. We also need to listen to the scientists and the medical experts and listen to their guidance and create national guidelines around how best to keep ourselves safe in regard to social distancing and mask wearing and things of that nature. We also need to collaborate globally on the development, the manufacture, and the distribution of a vaccine. Under this current administration, we've decided to go it alone in this country at a time when I think we need to come together with our global neighbors to get through this pandemic. And we also need to use this time to ensure that health insurance is available for every citizen who needs it. And let's reinvest in our public health infrastructure so that we're prepared when and if something like this comes along. Because the reality is, if we don't address this pandemic properly, we're going to continue to see economic challenges and economic fallout. And unfortunately, we're under a current Republican administration that's not taken this pandemic seriously from the start. Our president has frequently questioned, if not mocked, the wearing of masks. We found out recently that, in fact, he knew very early on how serious this virus was, how contagious it was, and how deadly it was. And yet he chose to hide that to make his own political fortunes more important than the safety and well-being of the American people. And I'm facing an incumbent in Representative Huizenga, who's been fully supportive of the failed efforts of this administration in tackling this virus. And then, of course, we need to, in a bipartisan way, be sure that we pass COVID relief so that Americans can have the support they need, small businesses can have access to loans so that they can continue to weather the storm of this economic downturn, and we can all get through the other side of this as well as possible.
The pandemic is impacting Americans' activities. What action should be taken ensuring that the presidential election is free, fair, and secure?
Well, fortunately, a number of actions have already been taken. Here in the state of Michigan, we know that in 2018, we passed the ability for people to vote absentee for any reason. And we didn't know then that we would be in this situation of a global pandemic, but Michiganders can vote safely and early by mail. And I think that's a fantastic thing. And I think what we need to hear from our elected officials is trust in the process. We've seen too many questions not based on reality from this president in particular about the validity of voting by mail, even though he himself votes by mail. We need to trust that we have systems and processes in place, which we do, to allow Americans to vote safely from home, by mail, or safely in person on election day. We need to make sure every voice is heard.
You touched on health care earlier. The Affordable Care Act has been long debated. What is the correct course for providing Americans with health care? And do you believe people with pre-existing conditions should be protected?
I absolutely believe that people with pre-existing conditions should be protected, and that's been one of the successes of the Affordable Care Act, in which over 20 million Americans received coverage they did not otherwise have access to, either because of economic challenge or pre-existing conditions. And I think we need to continue to build on the success of the Affordable Care Act, not tear it down as my opponent wants to do. He's voted over 60 times to repeal all or part of the ACA with no plan in place for the millions of Americans and a number of Michiganders right in his district who would lose access to their health care coverage. That is unconscionable as far as I'm concerned.
President Donald Trump has made it a point of renegotiating trade deals. Some of the negotiating tactics include enacting tariffs. In your opinion, is the overall plan working? What job creation strategy or strategies do you support?
Well, I think we need to look at what is working and what isn't. We need to be sure that we are creating a market for American agriculture and industry so that we can be competitive globally. And I think, negotiating trade deals is a part of that. I'm not sure how successful the president's efforts have been. As we talk to farmers around the district, it seems that in many ways it's not working. And what the administration has attempted to do is simply buy off the farmers by providing payments to them, which he says are profits from the tariffs. But of course, we know that's not true because Americans are already paying for the tariffs. And so I think we need to be sure that we're investing in American agriculture and industry. And we need to encourage manufacturing right here in this country. And we need to be sure that we have competitive corporate tax rates so that corporations know that they can compete globally by staying right here at home in the United States.
How will you address racial inequality and police brutality?
I think we need to face the reality that systemic racism exists. If we don't realize the reality and the underlying causes of the struggles we're seeing, we're not going to be able to address them. I also want to say that I do not support violence for any reason. As Americans use their First Amendment right to protest injustices that they see, I do support peaceful protests and peaceful calls for changes. Americans witnessed horrifically for over 8 minutes in May as an African American had his life taken from him while a police officer stood with a knee on his neck, even though he was crying out for help, crying out for his mother, and crying out, "I can't breathe." We need to work to ensure that this tragedy never happens again. And I think we do that by investing in our police, by being sure that they have the anti-bias training that they need, to be sure that they're trained in de-escalation techniques. And we need to end qualified immunity so that we can hold bad actors accountable. I also think we need to invest in community mental health and in social work so that we're not asking our police officers to do too much. And there are other resources our communities can rely upon in times of need. And then I think we need to develop better relationships between law enforcement and our local communities through community forums and times for conversation and relationship building.
From cyber interference in democratic elections to the proliferation of nuclear weapons, what defense or national security measures are necessary for dealing with emboldened world leaders and terrorists who are targeting the United States?
Well, we need to continue to build relationships with our allies around the world, and we need to stand up to authoritarian leaders around the world. And unfortunately, under the Trump administration, too often we've seen the reverse. We've seen the crumbling of relationships with our historic allies, and we've seen a cozying up to the leaders of Russia, China, and North Korea. And that, in my estimation, has things backwards. And so we need to be sure that our law enforcement, FBI and CIA, has access to and the funding they need to protect us at home and abroad. We need to be sure to continue to support our men and women who serve in uniform to keep us safe around the world. And again, I think relationship building has to be the key, and re-engaging and being a global leader on a number of fronts in cooperation with our allies.
In Congress, how will you deal with special interest groups influencing policy in Washington?
I think that's one of the major problems with our democracy at the moment. And I'm happy to be running a campaign that is financed by and for individual voters. My opponent takes on special interest money from big oil, Wall Street, big pharma, you name it. And that influences the legislature, the legislation that he votes on. And I believe that our elected officials should be voting based on the interests of their constituents, first and foremost, and not special interests. And so I think we really need to look at some of the causes of this. We need to look at overturning Citizens United, which said corporations are people and money is free speech. And what that's allowed is the flooding of special interest money and dark money into our political system. And it's unhealthy for democracy, and it dilutes our own voices in our system. I support a publicly financed election system with potential small dollar matching and caps on how much can be spent in any one race. If you look at some of the races happening in this particular year, one of the challengers for Senate in South Carolina, the Democratic challenger, I believe, raised $57 million in one quarter of one race. Imagine where that money could go to solve many of the challenges that we're facing as a nation. We have to do something.
All right, we have about 2 minutes. Do you believe humans are significantly contributing to climate change?
I do. It is the overwhelming consensus of the scientific community that climate change is real, it's a threat, and that it has human causes. And so I think we need to take that very seriously, and we need to take action, because the future of future generations, my own children, our children's children, is at stake. And I think we can do that with ending federal subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. Why are we spending billions of dollars of taxpayer money to make oil and gas cheaper? Instead, we should level the playing field and allow cleaner sources of energy to compete in the marketplace for energy. And if you look at locally, the city of Holland relies on 1/3 of its energy on wind. Grand Haven, 1/4 of its energy comes from solar. And there are many jobs to be found by investing in clean energy sources. Michigan's already a leader. Let's become even more so.
About a minute to go here. West Michigan is known for its natural resources. Are there additional protections you believe are needed protecting our water, our forests, and also our agriculture?
Absolutely. We need to continue to fund the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative so that we protect our Great Lakes. And we also need to be sure that we have proper regulation against pollution in our inland lakes, rivers, streams, and waterways. We've seen a continual repeal of environmental regulations under the Trump administration, and you can't simply protect one part of the environment while destroying another part. The whole ecosystem is interrelated, and we have to take action to protect all of it. And it actually has the byproduct of having many economic gains as well.
Under what dire circumstance or government necessity would you be willing to support a tax increase?
We saw a tax plan that was passed by the Trump administration and was supported by Bill Huizenga recently, and that reduced taxes on the wealthiest Americans and on the wealthiest corporations, and helped lead to the largest budget deficit we have ever seen in the history of this nation. And West Michigan cares about fiscal responsibility, and that was a bill that did not provide that. Under a healthy economy, that's the time to address the national debt, not to balloon it out of proportion. And so I support the tax plan that nominee, Democratic nominee for President Joe Biden supports, and that's an increase of taxes on Americans making over $400,000 a year, as well as modest corporate tax increases so that corporations that are profiting to the tune of millions and billions of dollars are helping reinvest in the infrastructure of this nation, which provides the platform for them to have their economic success in the first place.
There are economists who are concerned about the growing wealth disparity as a threat to the country's future economic growth and prosperity. Do you concur or disagree, and give us your reasoning?
I agree 100%. And history shows that the wider the gap between those who have and those who don't, the wider the gap between the wealthy and the poor, the less stable a nation becomes. And tax plans, such as I just cited under President Trump, have exacerbated that. And so I think we need to really invest again in Americans. That means investing in public education, making sure that higher education is affordable and accessible, especially for lower income students and families. We need to make sure that job training and skills training is available at whatever stage of your career you are at. We need to raise the federal minimum wage. And we need to encourage employers to have jobs that pay a living wage, a family supporting wage, so that more Americans can see the fruit of their labors and know that they don't have to worry about putting a roof over their head, paying for food on the table, and being sure they can take care of their families and their children.
Speaking of investments, do you believe the nation should invest in alternative energy or rely on fossil fuels securing energy independence?
Well, as I've already noted, I think we need to end fossil fuel subsidies so that we can level the playing field between cleaner, more renewable sources of energy and traditional fossil fuels. I think that's imperative economically as well as environmentally, and there's gains to be found there. Too often we're told that we can either invest in the economy or invest in the environment, but I think that's a false dichotomy. Michigan is already a clean energy job leader in the Midwest, and I think, again, there's more gains to be found there. And so we need to begin moving ourselves to a more balanced energy portfolio, because I think that positions us more to be energy independent, and it also creates opportunity for new jobs.
All right, last question. Is there a moral or personal issue you support that is in opposition to the party's ideology? What is it, and why do you strongly adhere to your belief?
That's a good question. I think, one of the things Democrats are often framed as is big spenders and being not fiscally responsible or fiscally conservative. And as someone who grew up in West Michigan, and as someone who's got my own family budget and has worked 2 jobs to put food on the table for my own family, I know that you have to be able to afford what you pay for. And so I certainly support getting a hold of our national debt, balancing the budget, and being sure that we're not laying that debt at the feet of our children and future generations, because it destabilizes our economy, it destabilizes us globally in terms of national security, and it's just not the fiscally responsible thing to do.
Democratic candidate Revered Bryan Berghoef from Holland, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.